Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for attending. Welcome to our 2023 industry predictions. Really appreciate everyone being here. My name is Dustin Robinson, and I wear four hats in the psychedelic industry. My first hat is through Iter Investments, which is my venture capital fund that invests in early stage psychedelic companies. My second hat is my venture studio hat, which is through Nucleus. So, Nucleus is actually a venture studio that owns Psychedelic Invest and other media and data assets. So Nucleus is a company that we're really building multiple companies underneath Nucleus, and we're actually in the process of a crowdfunding for Nucleus. At the bottom of each slide, starting on the next slide, you'll actually see a link in case anyone is interested in investing in Nucleus. We're building a really broad ecosystem to kind of capture all the different media assets and the different data in the industry. And that data is really what allows us to do some of these different presentations like we're doing today. My third hat is my nonprofit hat through Mr. Psychedelic Law. That's my nonprofit where we draft legal reform. And then my fourth hat is my law firm, which represents various companies within the psychedelic space. So I come at this from an investment perspective, but also a legal perspective and also an advocacy perspective. So really appreciate everyone joining. I'm going to start off with some quick disclaimers. I am an attorney, but nothing in this presentation should be construed as legal advice. And this presentation doesn't create any sort of attorney-client relationship. I'm also not a licensed investment advisor, so nothing should be construed to be investment advice. This presentation is purely for informational and educational purposes only. Will not be doing any stock predictions or anything of that nature that would be construed as investment advice. But I will be providing some information on kind of what we see as the most important things going on in the 2023 year. What we're going to do is I'm going to start it off by talking about some of the research and science that we're expecting in 2023. Then we'll go into the capital markets. Then we're going to talk about some of the things happening from a regulatory perspective. And lastly, I'm going to touch on some of the business trends. So we're just going to kind of roll through this, hoping this only takes around 20 to 30 minutes. And then I'm going to leave time at the end for a Q&A. So if you have any questions whatsoever, just drop them in the comments box and I'll be sure to get to them at the end. So we're going to jump into the research and science. So these are the things that, I think are most important that we should be looking at from a research and science perspective here in the psychedelic industry. First bullet point is we're expecting the results of MAPS phase 3 trial of MDMA for PTSD. We're expecting that to be published in the first half of 2023. We also hope that MAPS will file their NDA by the end of 2023. Our expectation is that MAPS will likely get approval for MDMA by Q1 of 2024, which is very exciting. MAPS is the furthest along of any of the psychedelic drug development companies. So we're hoping that MDMA will be the first compound approved, once again, hopefully Q1 2024. And then they'll have to build out the clinics and train the therapists and really roll this out from a commercialization perspective. We're very close with MAPS. My fund invested $500,000 into MAPS. I was just with Rick Doblin this past weekend, hearing about some of their plans, but their phase 3 trials were absolutely tremendous. Their first phase 3 was great, and now their second phase 3 trial apparently is also showing similar success. In their original phase 1 trial, they showed that 2/3 of the participants that went through their MDMA psychedelic assisted therapy were no longer clinically diagnosed with PTSD. So that's absolutely tremendous. It was published in Science Magazine as one of the top 10 breakthroughs of the year. So very exciting stuff coming out of MAPS. Next is USONA's phase 2 results for psilocybin for major depressive disorder are expected in the first half of 2023. This is very highly anticipated. We have heard that the results are positive, but obviously once they publish those results, we'll know just how positive that really is. Next, we have Small Pharma. They actually just recently published their results for their phase 2A trial using DMT for major depressive disorder. So those results were absolutely huge. The reason why those results we were so excited about is because this was really the first short-acting psychedelic trial that really showed a lot of success. And you'll see throughout this presentation, I'll kind of talk about kind of how we see these short-acting psychedelics being a real game changer for the psychedelic industry. So when I'm talking about these short-acting or short-duration psychedelics, what I'm referring to is the duration of the trip. So, for example, MAPS and USONA, the MDMA trial in MAPS and the psilocybin trial in USONA, those last up to 6 to 10 hours. DMT is a compound that lasts a much shorter period of time, 15 to 30 minutes. Small Pharma is actually trying to extend that with another in technology that they developed that extends it to around 45 minutes to an hour. So kind of seems like a lot of these companies are aiming for that 45-minute to 1 hour to maybe even 2 hour time frame for this trip. The logic there is that people do not want to go into a clinic and sit there for 6 to 10 hours to get their therapy. So the hope is that these short duration psychedelic compounds will show just as much efficacy, if not more efficacy, to these long duration psychedelic compounds. And it will allow these compounds to be delivered in a shorter time frame at a lower cost, and just much easier to kind of deal with a patient being there for a much shorter duration. Beckley Psytech is the next one. They are also pursuing short duration psychedelic compounds. We're expecting the first MHRA approved phase 2A study for them. That's their 5-MeO DMT for treatment resistant depression. Hopefully that comes out by the first half of 2023. Beckley also, just a couple months ago, purchased Eleusis, and Eleusis had several compounds that were moving through clinical trials. The main one is ELE-101, which is a psilocin for MDD. And we're expecting those results in the first half of this year. And hopefully phase 2A studies for patients suffering with MDD planned for initiation in the first half of 2023 as well. So Beckley Psytech and Small Pharma, two companies that are really pursuing short duration psychedelics. Small Pharma is focusing on MDD. Beckley Psytech is focusing on TRD right now. Next up, we have Compass Pathway. We're expecting them to commence their first phase 3 trial using psilocybin for TRD. That's treatment-resistant depression. That is, a huge trial. They finished their phase 2 trial just in 2022. Results were relatively positive. I know they're spending a lot of time creating their clinical trial design for phase 3. One of the big issues in their phase 2 trial was the durability. A lot of the patients showed tremendous results, within, kind of a 4 to 6 week time frame. But as time went by, they kind of saw these diminishing results. So I know Compass is working hard in their phase 3 trial to try to address some of those durability issues. And, I think that's going to be extremely big news as we see results come out for Compass Pathways phase 3 trial. Next up is Clairvoyant. This is a company that isn't talked about very much. Clairvoyant is probably going to have their phase 2B interim reports in June of this year. They are researching psilocybin for alcohol use disorder. In full transparency, they are a portfolio company of ours. Beckley Psytech is also a portfolio company of ours, and we've also invested in MAPS as well. Next up is GH Research. Their phase 2B trial for TRD is expected in Q1 2023. And they're expecting phase 1 trial of GH002 expected for Q4 2023. GH Research has the largest market cap right now of any company in the psychedelic space. I think they have over 200 million in cash, so they're very well positioned from a cash perspective, and once again have the highest market cap in the industry. GH Research is pursuing also short duration psychedelics. So now we've gone over Small Pharma, Beckley Psytech. GH Research is another company that is pursuing short duration psychedelic compounds. MindMed expects key data readouts from its phase 2B proof of concept trial for low dose LSD and ADHD in 2023. They also expect to initiate their first clinical trial of MM402 for generalized anxiety disorder by the end of 2023. So, there's kind of these different categories. There's the long duration macrodose, there's a short duration macrodose, and then you have some of these low dose trials that are going on, which is what MindMed is doing. Loeb Sciences preliminary data for their first phase 1 trial with L130, which is a psilocin product. And then you also have Cybin's phase 1/2A study for psilocybin expected this year. Cybin is another company. They have some short duration psychedelic compounds as well. So those are kind of the main short duration companies. I would say Small Pharma, Beckley Psytech, GH Research, and Cybin are kind of leading the way on these short duration psychedelic compounds. But one thing you'll notice, besides MAPS, is we're not expecting any approvals in 2023. This is a very long process in drug development. So, I know some people got into this industry and wanted things to move faster, but, as you look at this chart, you'll kind of see these things take a while. Once MAPS gets their approval in hopefully Q1 of 2024, next is probably going to be Clairvoyant, which is doing their trials in Canada. They're expecting around 2025 to have their approval for psilocybin. And then Compass Pathway likely will not be far behind, probably 2026, 2027. And then you got companies like GH Research, Beckley Psytech, Small Pharma. They're all kind of racing to be the first to the finish line for these short duration psychedelics, but they all have several years left before we should expect any sort of approval. So once again, if anyone has any questions on any of this stuff, you can just drop it into the comments box. I'll be sure to get to them at the end. But we're moving on to the capital markets. So there's been inflation, war in Russia. I mean, if any of you guys are investors, the macroeconomic conditions are really putting a strain on all industries, and the psychedelic industry is certainly not immune to that. Some of these psychedelic companies like Iter and Compass, they had over $1 billion market caps, and now their market caps are, between 200 million to 500 million, depending on the day. So we've seen the industry get quite hit by these macroeconomic factors. The good news, and what I always say, is that the science is objective to markets. And what I mean by that is even when the markets are doing bad, science is objective. And the science in the industry continues to be extremely, extremely strong. So we're very excited for the potential. Markets go up, markets go down. But science is one thing that is very, very objective. And right now, the science in the industry, as I showed in the first slide, is proving to be very, very strong. The global psychedelic drug market size is projected to grow from 4.2 billion in 2002 to 4.83 billion in 2023. It's also expected to grow to 8 billion by 2027. So a lot of growth, a lot of excitement around the industry, but we certainly are in a very tough economic climate. And so there is a capital shortage right now in the psychedelic industry. A lot of these companies raise capital for some of their preclinical work or even for their phase 1 trials. But the reality is that phase 2 and phase 3 trials and then the commercialization cost way more money. So there needs to be a tremendous amount of capital to come into the industry, regardless of how strong the science is or the research is. These companies cannot follow through with their research plans unless we have a tremendous amount of capital coming into the industry. So what I believe this is going to lead to is consolidation. I already mentioned Beckley Psytech acquired Eleusis just a couple months ago. Another announcement just recently was Urban Naturals announced an LOI to acquire Braxia. Previous to that, Braxia acquired Keta MD. And we're already, with our portfolio companies, we're in multiple discussions on consolidation. Obviously, those I can't disclose because they're still confidential and they haven't been announced publicly. But I, certainly expect 2023 to be a year of tremendous consolidation within the psychedelic industry. So that's certainly something that you should be looking out for. My best prediction, this last bullet point, I'm hoping the market starts to turn towards the end of Q3 2023. We are talking to a lot of investment professionals, a lot of people in the industry, what's going to happen in this macroeconomic environment. No one truly knows, but my expectation is that we will hopefully start to see things turn in Q3 of this year. The stock market actually did see some positive stuff going on just in January. I think that is probably a little bit of an anomaly. I think we're gonna probably see some downward tracking again. But the unfortunate news, just to be clear, is even when the market turns, my expectation is it's going to be a very slow turn. So right now we're kind of going, way down, and hopefully Q3 things start to level off, and then we're going to very, very slowly, I believe, see a very short increase of the markets. But no one knows. There's a lot of different people making all sorts of projections, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the market right now. But the advice we're giving a lot of our portfolio companies is to try to do their best to have runway for the next 12 to 24 months, because very hard to raise capital in this current economic environment. And once again, as a result, we're also working with our portfolio companies on some potential consolidation, some M&A strategies, or some other potential collaborations with other companies. So very, very can't emphasize enough, very, very tough time from a macroeconomic perspective, which is heavily impacting both the biotech industry and specifically the psychedelic industry as well. Once again, the bottom of each slide has, if you were interested in investing, just want to point this out. This is the parent company of psychedelicinvest.com. Iter Investments, our fund, is the investor. We founded Nucleus. So if you like the content, you think there's value to what we're creating at Nucleus, definitely encourage you to take a look at this website. It has full information on what we're building at Nucleus, and I truly believe that this industry is going to continue to grow. There's going to be a huge need for more content, more data, and we believe that we're going to be the enterprise that's able to provide that information. So from a regulatory environment, we're watching a lot of different items. We just talked a lot about the research. A lot of that is happening at the FDA level or Health Canada level, essentially at the federal level. But we're seeing a lot of things happening at a state and city level here in the US as well. And one of those things that we're seeing is decriminalization. In 2022, that was a huge year for decriminalization. Decriminalization and legalization, it's important we make that distinction. Decriminalization is just making it the lowest priority for that city or state to enforce their laws. It doesn't actually legalize these compounds. So for example, Denver was the first city to decriminalize some of these different psychedelic compounds. That only decriminalizes possession and use. So if you're possessing or using these compounds in Denver, basically it's the lowest priority for them to enforce that. It does not allow, a decriminalized framework does not allow you to actually create a commercial enterprise and sell these products. It only allows possession and use, doesn't create a commercial market. But we also saw in 2022 is Oregon roll out the first legalized market. So once again, decrim doesn't allow a commercialized legal market. Legalization, which is what Oregon did, creates a regulated framework that allows you to roll out these compounds from a commercial perspective. So towards the end of 2022, one of our portfolio companies, Fluent, started training facilitators. So that program, from that perspective, has already started in 2022. These facilitators are getting trained to be able to deliver this medicine. But what needs to happen is this medicine needs to be delivered at what they're calling a service center. So this isn't a market where you could go and buy it at a retail store. You'll need to actually go into a service center, and the medicine will be delivered by a trained facilitator. So that the service center licenses, they opened up in January of this year. So right now, Oregon is accepting applications for service centers. It's going to be very exciting to see how this all rolls out. They've also passed some pretty interesting rules in Oregon. Originally, when Measure 109 passed, there was kind of an expectation that it was only going to be around macro dosing, and you were going to have to stay at a service center for a very long period of time. And there would be a small amount of clients per one facilitator. But Oregon recently also passed rules that basically break it down into different doses so depending at how big your dose is, you may need to stay at the service center for an even shorter time, and there's less of a ratio facilitators to clients at that service center. So for example, at the lowest dose that you're able to provide in Oregon, a client is only required to stay there for just 1 hour, and I believe it's one facilitator per 20 clients. So in other words, you could imagine potentially a coffee shop of some sort where the barista is a trained facilitator, and they let in 20 people into the coffee shop. They clock in, they have to stay there for an hour, but they're able to consume this low dose psilocybin at this coffee shop. That one facilitator for every 20 clients is there. They check the box on that. So I think people are going to start getting very creative in this Oregon framework, and it'll be very interesting to see how this rolls out. Colorado rolled out something very similar to the Oregon program just recently. They haven't rolled out their program yet, but they passed legislation similar to Oregon. But there's one major distinction in Colorado, and Colorado actually went further than Oregon in that what they did is they also are allowing for shamans and other facilitators to operate outside of a regulated framework, but they can't charge for the medicine. And there's a lot of controversy around this. What will be the consequences of this? And this is just my opinion. You could imagine if you have a regulated framework where you got to spend thousands of dollars to get a license, you got to operate legally, but now you have this unregulated market where shamans are able to provide essentially the same services, but they don't need to go through the facilitator training program, which could cost up to $10,000. They don't need to pay the other legal fees. And the only thing is that they can't sell the psilocybin product. The reality is in the black market today, most shamans and facilitators don't actually charge for the medicine. They charge for the service, and the medicine is free. So I envision that this is going to cause a lot of tension among the regulated market. We see in California with the cannabis market that the black market is a huge threat to the California white market for cannabis. And that's because the black market doesn't have to pay all the additional fees that the white market has to pay. And I envision what Colorado passed is potentially creating some tension there. I know there was very positive intent. They want to allow possession. They want to allow use. They want to allow gifting. And that was really the intent there. But I think it's going to cause a lot of different issues with some of the companies that are operating in the regulated framework. And it might incentivize people to not operate within that regulated framework and instead to operate under the unregulated framework. We're also seeing a lot of states decriminalize. California has SB 58. There's a lot of different stuff happening at a lot of different state levels. In Florida, we've actually, my nonprofit has filed multiple bills in the past 2 legislative sessions. We're working on a bill coming up in this next legislative session. But what we do on Psychedelic Invest, I encourage if anyone's interested in the regulatory environment, this what I have on the slide is very, very simplified. But we actually have on the Psychedelic Invest website a full legal guide where we track every single city and state and what's happening, whether they're decriminalizing, whether they're legalizing, what their bills say. So I encourage if anyone is interested to kind of track what's happening in this regulatory environment, I encourage you to go on the psychedelicinvest.com website and check out our legal guide that we're trying to keep up to date quite frequently. And also, I just wanted to mention Psychedelic Pro. We have pro users on Psychedelic Invest where you're getting some of the information we're talking about today. We're giving this to you in a more regular manner. So you're getting market updates, you're getting regulatory updates, you're getting these in a much more regular manner. So if you're interested in really keeping track of the industry, I also encourage you to check out psychedelicinvest.com and click on Become a Pro. And you could basically start getting more of this data and analytics on a more regular basis. So beyond what's happening in the US with decriminalization and legalization, we're also seeing some countries make some moves. On here, this last bullet point, we're expecting to see a ruling in the Canadian court case fighting for psilocybin access. My best prediction is I actually believe that the access will be granted because there's a similar case within the cannabis industry called R versus Parker. This is another Canadian case that was decided that essentially gave access to medical cannabis in Canada. And it's a very, very similar argument they're making in this Canadian court case. So I expect that decision will come out sometime this year, and that will be a huge deal depending on where the courts end up. Another thing to take note of that's not on this slide, just recently, Australia announced the rescheduling of psilocybin and MDMA. So that didn't make it on these slides because I made these slides right before that news was published. But once again, I just kind of want to say that this is happening in real time. It seems like every day there's either a city or a state or a country making some sort of changes. So once again, I definitely encourage you guys to check out the legal guide on psychedelicinvest.com. We're actually updating it tonight. So if you want to check it out, you might want to wait till tomorrow because there's a bunch of updates we're coming out with that will be live tomorrow. But we track all this data in real time and certainly encourage you guys to check it out. Here are some business trends. I just want to identify some things that we're keeping an eye on as an investment fund. Number one is the short-acting psychedelics could hopefully prove to be efficacious. We just recently saw the small pharma phase 2A trial results, which were very positive. Like I mentioned before, I think if the short-acting psychedelics prove to be efficacious, I think they are a great alternative to some of these longer acting psychedelics. Next thing I have on here, we're going to have further development on psychedelic new chemical entities, including non-hallucinogenic new chemical entities. What a lot of people, there's the traditional psychedelic compounds, MDMA, psilocybin, LSD, mescaline, peyote, DMT, 5-MeO, DMT. There's a lot of companies right now working on developing new chemical entities. And what a lot of people don't realize is some of these compounds like LSD and MDMA, they were made in a lab. Unlike psilocybin or DMT, which is a natural compound, LSD and MDMA were made in the lab. So once upon a time, they were new chemical entities. But then in the 1970s, when they were listed as Schedule 1 on the Controlled Substances Act, a lot of that new scientific discovery of new psychedelic chemical entities just stopped. And we're seeing this resurgence now. So certainly LSD and MDMA are incredible compounds, but I expect that you're going to be seeing a lot of new psychedelic chemical entities that are being developed throughout 2023 and thereafter. The non-hallucinogenic NCEs, the trial's still out on that. We don't have any sort of firm conviction around non-hallucinogenic NCEs. We're very interested in it. This is the idea of developing compounds that are similar in structure to psychedelics, but don't hit the 5-HT2A receptor, which causes the hallucination. And my general thoughts there is that these may have some potential for certain types of indications. So for neurodegenerative diseases or headaches or maybe even pain, I think perhaps the pharmacokinetics of these compounds could be helpful. But I'm very skeptical that these non-hallucinogenic compounds could be helpful for things like PTSD or treatment-resistant depression or major depressive disorder, because I believe that this subjective mystical experience is really important. When you're suffering from something like depression or PTSD or something of that nature, your mind is in a constant loop of negative thoughts. So it seems like, the psychedelic mystical experiences is what kind of helps you reprocess these things and stops that negative loop of thoughts and creates neuroplasticity. So your thinking is not so rigid. That's just my thought. I'm certainly not a doctor or scientist. I've talked to a lot of doctors and scientists, and from talking to a lot of experts who don't believe that non-hallucinogenic, some believe that non-hallucinogenic compounds have no place and they're not going to do anything. Other very smart people think that they're going to be absolutely tremendous for the industry. So there's experts that differ on both sides. Right now, the research really isn't out. So this is an area you definitely want to pay attention to. Third bullet point is psychedelic retreat and industry could potentially take off. We've really seen a lot of incredible work being done on the stigma around psychedelics. I think as more of this science and research proves out, you're going to see more people being open to psychedelics. But being that the psychedelic research, the approval process takes so long, we're starting to see more people seeking out these compounds. Unfortunately, they have to travel to places like like Jamaica or the Netherlands to get this treatment, which is obviously very cost prohibitive. But we believe that the retreat industry is going to really start to take off. We're going to see a lot more retreats coming in, and we're going to see a lot of people looking to fly out to these different countries where these are either unregulated or legalized. Fourth bullet point, there could be a continued increase in the number of ketamine clinics as the market gets ready for MDMA approval in 2024. So we have, we track within our database the ketamine clinics that are being opened up. There's over 400 ketamine clinics opened up throughout the US. And that number every month we're tracking it, it's increasing exponentially. And the ketamine, right now they're currently operating as ketamine clinics, but with the potential approval of MDMA, there's even more clinics starting to open up, and their intent is to deliver MDMA psychedelic assisted therapy once it becomes approved. And just recently, some close friends of mine, Cody Chandra and Daniel Carcillo, announced that they started the Healing REIT, which is actually a real estate investment trust that is set up to finance the real estate and the build out for some of these ketamine clinics. So they believe that there is going to have to be tens of thousands of these clinics built out over the next several years. And they want to provide the capital to buy that real estate and do that build out to really support the industry. So I'm involved with them in full disclosure. I think they're doing incredible work. So I want to be involved. And they're doing incredible work. So I'm very hopeful that that'll work out and hopefully allow this industry to scale much further, because the biggest bottleneck in this industry, and Rick Doblin from MAPS talks a lot about this, is that we don't currently have the clinic infrastructure required. We don't have enough therapists trained for psychedelic assisted therapy. So we're hopeful that the Healing REIT will help finance some of these properties and some of the build out so we could speed up and build out some of this clinical infrastructure. Last bullet point is technological innovation around the delivery of care. We've invested in some VR platforms that are doing tremendous work around this, such as Trip and Anuma. There's also other companies that are creating enterprise data management tools like Maya Health, Homecoming. So really excited to see kind of the technological development that's happening around the delivery of care right now. One last thing I'll just kind of mention, just recently, the Biden administration announced that they are ending the public health emergency. The relevance to that in this industry is that the public health emergency is what allowed these ketamine telehealth companies to exist. It basically got rid of the requirement in the Ryan Haight Act that required one in-person visit before prescribing a controlled substance like ketamine. And now that that public health emergency is going away, I think they announced it's going away May 11th. These ketamine telehealth companies, they could still exist, but the patient will need to have one in-person session with a doctor for that first prescription. So that's certainly going to be a challenge for many of these ketamine telehealth companies. And it'll be really interesting to see how these ketamine telehealth companies kind of adjust and move forward with their business plans despite the ending of this public health emergency. That's the end of it. I see we have a bunch of questions coming in. Before we jump into the questions, just once again, want to let you guys know, here's the website. If anyone is interested, once again, Nucleus is the mother company of psychedelicinvest.com. It's also the mother company of Newly.com, psilocybinconcierge.com, a bunch of different URLs that we have where we're building some digital media sites. So really excited for what we're building at Nucleus. If you want to learn more about what we're building at Nucleus, definitely encourage you to check out the link here. So we are going to jump into the Q&A, and I will just start at the top. I see the first question, Shivan Bhagwandine, is did it start? I'm not sure what she was referring to. The question was posed at 4:06 p.m. I'm assuming she maybe was referring to one of the clinical trials. But yeah, some of those trials are underway. Some of them will be initiated sometime in 2023. Next question. What are your thoughts on RTT advocacy and where the DEA FDA stands, and if we can get psilocybin approved for RTT? So RTT is referring to the Right to Try Act. Yes, I just realized I didn't really address much of the Right to Try Act. There is currently a lawsuit going on relating to the Right to Try Act. The big challenge with the Right to Try Act is that, and I'm certainly no expert on the Right to Try Act, but I'll share what I do know about it. The big challenge there is that in order for, so the Right to Try Act, the concept behind it is that people that are suffering at the end of their life, they should have access to whatever medicine really they want to try. If you're coming to the end of your life, you shouldn't really have to wait for a compound to get FDA approval. But one of the requirements in there is that you need to be getting that compound from a drug sponsor that's finished phase 1 trials. So phase 1 trials are all about safety. You get into efficacy in phase 2 and phase 3, and phase 2 and phase 3 also address safety as well. But phase 1 is really about safety. So the logic there with the Right to Try Act is that if you're at the end of your life, we'll let you try a medicine, but we want to at least make sure it's safe. We want to make sure it's gone through phase 1 clinical trials. And the challenge right now with psilocybin is the two companies that are in phase 2 trials with psilocybin are Compass and Usona, and they're not currently willing to provide psilocybin to patients trying to access it through RTT. And I think the big reason is because they don't want any negative outcomes that might risk what's going on at what they're doing at their clinical trials, right? So if they provide their medicine to a patient through the Right to Try Act and it's not really controlled by them and something bad happens, it might negatively impact their clinical trials, and the FDA might put additional requirements on them. So those enterprises are not willing to supply the medicine. So the lawsuit is basically trying to allow this psilocybin to be accessed by other means. And so hopefully, they'll be successful. I mean, I'm certainly an advocate for people who are suffering at the end of their life. We already know psilocybin is safe. We have tens of thousands of years showing it's safe, but now we actually have clinical trials demonstrating the safety of it. So I don't see a reason why that psilocybin compound necessarily needs to be provided by one of those drug sponsors. I think if you were to access it in another way, I think it would be reasonable. And then another part of, so I think hopefully that somewhat addresses that question relating to the Right to Try Act. Once again, there's a lawsuit pending, so we'll know more as the court makes a decision there. Next question, can you please comment on whether the emerging psychedelic ecosystem has a responsibility to include the indigenous communities globally? And do you have dialogue with your portfolio companies regarding this? This has been an extremely big topic we've talked a lot about. I actually do a monthly panel at Soho House. We've already done 2 indigenous use panels to talk about how we could include the indigenous communities in the development of the industry. We also just recently did a Soho panel in New York just a couple months ago on conscious capitalism. And we had on there Bennett Zellner and Sutton King. Sutton is doing absolutely tremendous work with the indigenous group. She's actually raising a fund right now, and she's doing a great job doing that, trying to put more money into the indigenous use. My personal opinion is that I think that we need to respect the indigenous cultures. And I also think the biotech companies sometimes get a very bad rap that they're doing something wrong. And some of them may not be, acting in a responsible way. But for the most part, from the many CEOs I've talked to, they're trying to develop drugs for very serious mental and behavioral health indications, whether it's PTSD, addiction, treatment resistant depression. So they have a worthy goal. Their goal is to get these compounds in the hands of people who are really suffering. And they need to do that without interfering with these indigenous cultures. And just the same, I think the indigenous cultures, if they want to provide information and work in collaboration, that's really what I'd love to see. I'd love to see these indigenous cultures and some of the biotech companies working together to really develop different things. Sometimes there's certain indigenous cultures I've heard sometimes they say that they don't want to take part in the biotech side. Like they have, this is a sacrament to them. They feel no obligation to share that information. I totally respect that. I just think it's important that both sides understand one another's perspective. And I think it's important that neither side interferes what either side is doing. My personal opinion is that no one owns nature. I don't own nature. Biotech doesn't own nature. Indigenous cultures don't own nature. No one owns nature. Nature is nature. So I'm a big proponent of no one owning nature, but I think it's important that we build those bridges and try to work together to further this industry. So hopefully, this could be a discussion in and of itself. We could talk for hours about it. But that's my general thoughts. Same person has, this might be a continuing of that question. Oh, and also you asked if we talk to our portfolio companies on it. Absolutely. This is a constant dialogue amongst our portfolio companies and just the industry in general. I mean, we have 18 portfolio companies, but we talk with nearly every company in the industry. So this is a constant dialogue that's occurring. Any thoughts regarding psychedelic training companies and how to determine which are the most credible? Well, I'll tell you that we've done diligence on a lot of these training companies, and we decided to invest in Fluence Training. That's kind of who we thought was the most legitimate, but there's a lot of training programs out there. Beckley Academy has their own training academy. Third Wave Psychedelics Today has rolled out a training program. So there's a lot of different training programs. What we've actually done at Nucleus is there's so many different training programs, and it's really hard to figure out which one you want to take. We actually launched our own asset under Nucleus called Matter Academy, which is basically an aggregator of all the courses. Right now, we just have kind of our initial website up, so it's not fully built out yet. But our intention with Matter Academy is actually to address the exact question that you're asking. It really depends on who you are. There's certain training companies that are only focused on people that have a license to practice mental health, right? So Fluence, I think Beckley Academy might have that requirement. I'm not certain. And then others are more focused on just spiritual healing. I think, Third Wave, for example, I don't believe requires that you have any sort of higher education. Psychedelics Today doesn't require that you have any sort of higher education or license. So I think for your question, it really depends on, who you are and what you're looking to get out of that. And we hope in the future that Matter Academy could be a really valuable resource to help you answer that question. Next question. How will the at-home ketamine models need to adjust given the end of COVID? Do you see them pivot away from the model? Yeah, so I kind of covered this towards the end, but the big requirement is the Ryan-Haight Act requires that there's one, it's a federal law, the Ryan-Haight Act. It requires that there's one in-person visit for that first prescription. By the way, it doesn't say that you need to have annual in-person visits thereafter. It's kind of silent on that, but you need to operate in the right course of business. I actually just recently wrote an article that we published on psychedelicinvest.com that deals exactly with this question. And if the powers that be that are behind the scenes controlling this, Logan, maybe you could actually share the link to that article in the comments. But yeah, it's going to be a huge challenge because the Ryan Haight Act requires one in-person visit. During the public health emergency, they basically removed that requirement. So that was the birth of these ketamine telehealth companies. They were able to prescribe ketamine without an in-person visit. So you could just click a couple buttons, you can meet virtually with a doctor, and in the comfort of your own home, you could get a prescription of ketamine. It gets delivered to your door, and you could have a ketamine experience in the comfort of your own home. Now, all of that is still the case, with the one caveat that now you'll need one in-person visit. So what these ketamine telehealth companies will need to do is they will need to partner up with primary physicians that have a big network of in-person clinics. They'll have to partner up with maybe ketamine clinics. So they'll need to strategize to figure out a way so that these patients that are coming into their platform could satisfy that one condition. It's going to be a huge challenge. They have a really big challenge ahead of them. There's a couple companies that I think are doing it the right way, but even those companies I think are gonna have some challenges. Nicola, where is Big Pharma in all of this currently? Do they really have a deep interest in this industry? So the thing with Big Pharma to understand is that Big Pharma is very, very big. And they actually aren't big in innovation, just in general. Big Pharma lets startup biotech companies really innovate. So small pharma, the smaller companies are more nimble. They take bigger risks, and they're generally more innovative. Big Pharma has the muscle, the marketing muscle, and the commercialization muscle. So Big Pharma's MO in general, even outside the psychedelic space, and we saw this in the cannabis space, is they'll wait to see. They'll do one of two things. Either they'll put a little bit of money into a small pharma company and get access to the rights to those assets. So we saw Otsuka do that with in their deal with Mindset. We also saw Otsuka, I think they did that with Atai on some of the assets of Atai. So one is they'll put a little bit of capital to see where it goes early on. And if those trials are successful, they'll put more capital and eventually probably acquire the entire asset. The second thing that they do is they just wait to see until who the winners are going to be, and then they'll stroke a very large check. We saw that with GW Pharma getting bought out for, I think, $6 billion. We saw Pfizer buy Arena for $7.2 billion. So we saw this play out in the cannabis industry, where as these compounds become more successful, like GW Pharma's Epidiolex, which is a highly concentrated, isolated version of CBD, GW Pharma was acquired for, I think it was like $7 billion. Interestingly, the largest deals in the cannabis space, like the 3 or 4 largest deals, were actually biotech deals. So while the cannabis space, most of the companies are focused on the state-sanctioned frameworks, operating in Florida, operating in Colorado, wherever they're operating, the largest deals that have been done is the biotech. And I bring that up because it really shows the potential of what could happen in the psychedelic industry, since the psychedelic industry is really going mainly down the road of pharmaceuticals, at least currently, whereas cannabis really started off going under those state-sanctioned frameworks. So to the extent these companies are successful with what they're doing, the exit value could be very, very high on some of these deals. But like I said, we're seeing Otsuka, also Johnson & Johnson developed S-ketamine. The big pharma, they're talking to the psychedelic companies. They're poking around. They're trying to get more information. And they'll get involved, but when they're ready, when they feel comfortable with it. The other big thing that's keeping big pharma out is, just this paradigm shift of, the MDMA, for example, at MAPS, is only 3 therapy sessions. That doesn't fit well within big pharma. Big pharma likes selling SSRIs and benzos repetitively every day, getting people hooked on them with no end in sight. So, that's another thing where big pharma is kind of waiting it out. But there are companies that are, because of that, trying to develop these non-hallucinogenic psychedelic compounds because it fits more nicely into the current paradigm for mental health within the pharmaceutical industry. And there's also companies, one of our portfolio companies, Apex, they're starting the first low dose at-home psilocybin use. So there's non-hallucinogenic, there's also low dose, and certainly those fit a lot nicer into the current paradigm that big pharma is used to. Any thoughts on the probability of ketamine being approved for MDD, PTSD, and insurance coverage? The furthest along ketamine trial right now is with one of our portfolio companies, Awaken, and they are researching it for alcohol use disorder. They are moving into phase 3 clinical trials with ketamine for alcohol use disorder. They're also licensing out their protocols to other ketamine clinics right now, since ketamine is FDA approved and allowed to be used off label. So we're starting to see a lot of US companies licensing that Awaken protocol to deliver their protocol for AUD. But the intention of Awaken is to get ketamine approved for AUD. So indeed, it is covered by insurance. But as of now, I don't see, I could be wrong on this, but I don't know of any ketamine for MDD or PTSD trials that are very far along. I'm sure there's different small scale trials going on around ketamine for MDD. I will flag another one of our portfolio companies, Freedom Bio. They are doing research around those indications, but it's more of a ketamine analog, and kind of a different recipe than just normal ketamine. But Freedom Bio is a company you should definitely look out for if you're interested in ketamine for MDD or PTSD. Going to Eliana Bisk, California Institute. Okay, that wasn't a question. Future entheogenic medicines. Do you know of any studies out there comparing result outcomes of IV versus IM ketamine? I do not personally know. I'm sure they're out there, although I will tell you every single doctor I talk to has an opinion one way or the other. Some only like IM, some only like IV, some like IM in certain situations, some like IV in certain situations. So I'm certainly not a doctor. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other, and not currently aware of any big trials going on around that. I'm sure they exist. I'm just not aware of them. Oh, and Psychedelic Invest posted in the comments the article I was referencing before about ketamine telehealth. So definitely encourage you to read that if anyone is interested in any of that. And I'm coming to the end of my questions. They were all really good questions, and we're coming to the end of the hour anyway, so it's good timing. Really appreciate everyone joining. Hopefully you found this helpful and educational. If you did, I would love for you to just do me the favor and just check out the Nucleus website. It is flashing at the bottom of the screen, invest.withnucleus.com. We'd love for you to check it out. Whether you invest or not, we want you to become a part of our community. I want you to see the different assets we're launching within Nucleus, because whether you're an investor or not, we want you to be a part of our audience. We want to share this information with you. Love the questions we're getting. I absolutely think having these conversations is integral to the growth of the industry. We're all about spreading knowledge and education for the industry, and I think that's really what's going to push the industry forward. So thank you all for joining, and hope everyone enjoyed this industry predictions, and hope to see you on our next one. Have a great night.